If you're familiar with demonic entities, you know that many of them come forward as a child, specifically a young girl. It's been a while. Yes, I think it's been probably 2 months since I've uploaded a video. It's been an interesting start to the year. I've had a few scenarios happen in my life, kind of behind the scenes, where um, I haven't really felt motivated or driven to get down and sit in front of the camera and film. A couple not so good things have happened, a couple really good things have happened, and basically with the amount of information and scenarios that have happened in my life, I just haven't really felt motivated in anything really, especially with filming. When all of that happened, I felt like I was just kind of getting back into wanting to do something and film something when the issues around the world started to become a lot more severe, with the coronavirus and with all of the different countries, including my country, being on quarantine and lockdown. So it's been difficult for everyone, and I feel like it's a very difficult time to be alive and be a human. I just really haven't felt like it was appropriate to be filming videos about silly things or fun things until more recently. Hi, hello, friends. My name is Zoe. If you're new here, I try to post haunted and scary videos to my channel every week, and I would love for you to subscribe if you haven't already. Just click the link down below and turn on your notification bells if you want to be reminded every time that I upload a new video. Okay, let's dive in. Today I'm going to be talking about some haunted dolls. I feel like there's always been some kind of a negative vibe behind dolls in general. There's always been kind of that creepiness. I've never really been affected by dolls. They don't really scare me. I'm not one to be creeped out by them. However, there are a lot of horror stories and famous horror movies and famous stories surrounding dolls specifically that I think really motivated me to want to dive into this and actually go back and review some of the more famous haunted dolls that are out there in the world today. So this is my personal list. I went through and I researched many different dolls out there, and I know that there's probably dolls that you're familiar with that are more famous maybe that don't come on this list. But I wanted to kind of do a list of dolls that maybe you haven't heard of, or stories and hauntings behind these dolls that you've never heard of personally. And a couple of them I actually hadn't heard of either until I started researching them. So I thought it would be kind of neat to go through them, and I've went through their stories, their background, their history, and I've ranked them from least terrifying, I guess, or least scary, least haunted, if that's a thing, to most terrifying and most haunted, in my opinion. So just to put this out there, the doll that's in my thumbnail is not haunted, I believe. It was my great-grandmother's doll. I just wanted to be holding a cute doll when I took the thumbnail, so please don't send me questions about how haunted it is or what the story is about it. I don't have a story. It was my great-grandmother's and she's a keepsake. That's about it. We are going to start with number 5. First doll on my list is actually a doll called Robertina. You may or may not be familiar with a YouTuber out there named Bunny, or if you're familiar with her YouTube channel, it's Graveyard Girl. She's a really cool YouTuber. I've followed her for quite a few years now, and she's a very charismatic person, and she is a fellow lover of antique items like myself, and she loves antique shopping. One of her favorite stores that she goes to is an antique store in Houston, Texas called Uncommon Objects. If you're not familiar with their store, they actually have a bunch of different booths where different vendors can sell different items from around the world. The story goes that Bunny, this YouTuber, was shopping at her favorite store and she had noticed this doll. It was about 2 to 3 feet tall, so it was a rather large doll, the size of a toddler essentially. I have a 3-year-old and that sounds about her height. And it was a fabric doll made with really intricate details, like fingernails and hair and a lot of different features that a doll traditionally wouldn't necessarily have, especially a fabric doll. And Bunny was shopping and she noticed this doll, and this doll always caught her eye. She didn't buy it right away, but it was always there and it was something she always noticed. The day that she finally decided that she wanted to purchase this doll, she had this sudden wave of illness overcome her when she was at the store, and she didn't really quite know what to make of it, but she had to leave and she just felt suddenly really sick. So she ended up going home and not purchasing the doll. So a few weeks or months went by and she just had this feeling like the doll was calling to her that she needed to purchase the doll. So she ended up going back to Uncommon Objects. Once Bunny ended up purchasing the doll, she ended up naming it Robertina, which, if you're familiar with another famous haunted doll out there named Robert the Doll, spoiler, he will be on our list a little further down. Is that a little foresight into what was to come? I don't know, but it's interesting that she ended up naming her doll after another famous haunted doll. So as soon as she brought the doll home, she ended up, I believe she placed it in the living room, and it ended up living in a chair in her living room. And from the minute she brought it home, she just felt like there was this intrusive feeling in her home where something wasn't right. Something wasn't right, whether it was the doll or the energy. Something around this purchase didn't sit right with her. That night that she brought the doll home, there was some rain that happened in her town. It wasn't necessarily a heavy rainstorm, but it was constant and it was raining all night. So she actually owns a convertible. The soft top that is on the convertible actually has a drainage system, so that it doesn't have any water or anything pool up when it's subjected to the elements like rain. She woke up and found 2 inches of water in her vehicle, inside her car. What had happened was a single leaf had blown and blocked the drainage hole from her vehicle, and it ended up filling up with water, out of a complete fluke. Like something like this wouldn't happen out of the blue. So she maybe thought that this could be something of a warning sign, or maybe something that happened because she brought this energy, this doll, into her home. Bunny noticed that her mood was constantly changing. Her energy was a lot lower. She was feeling more negative. She was feeling more, just something was off. So she didn't know what to do. She called the store and they offered to take it back. However, she felt that she didn't want this doll to just go with anyone. She felt that it needed to go to the right home, I suppose. And she felt that there was definitely some kind of energy behind this doll, and she didn't want anyone to just have it. So she ended up putting it in a storage unit until she could figure out what to do with it. Now, I'm not sure if you're familiar with haunted objects or haunted items. So the number one thing not to do is to destroy them. You should never destroy items that have an energy or a spirit that's connected to them. That's not the right approach. So Bunny knew that, and she decided to just put the doll in a storage locker until she could figure out what to do with it. Interestingly enough, Bunny actually met the couple who sold the doll at Uncommon Objects in their booth, and they knew a bit of history behind Robertina and where she came from originally. This family had this doll, Robertina, and it had been passed down in their family for years and years. And the history behind it is they used to jokingly put the doll in a car at their home to try and scare the children, when it was time for them to start driving. So not scare them in the sense of never drive the car, but it was almost like Robertina was an observer, and she kind of watched what you were doing when you were driving the car. So not only did the doll protect the car, was very involved with cars, ironically enough, she also was a scare tactic to stop the kids from taking the vehicle when they weren't supposed to. So it's interesting that she had such a strong history with cars in her past, and the first night that Bunny has her, she ends up flooding her car. It's so creepy. So Bunny ended up selling the doll back to Uncommon Objects, and now the doll resides in a museum, which I believe is the best place for the doll. It's a museum in Alberta, Canada, called the Museum of Fear and Wonder. So that's number 5. So doll number 4 is Charlie the Doll. The doll itself, they actually don't know how old it is. However, it was found in a home in a trunk next to a newspaper clipping that was from the early 1900s. The family that found it decided to keep the doll, and they moved it downstairs. They had a collection of dolls. The dolls themselves sat on a little bench and were displayed there. The family's 5 children didn't actually play with the dolls. They were just for display. This family found Charlie the doll in the trunk in the 1960s. They didn't pay much attention to it. However, he started moving on the bench in different spots, and the parents immediately blamed the children, and the children insisted that they didn't touch him. The parents didn't believe them, and they just assumed that the children were messing with the dolls and moving them around. So the haunting, I suppose, started when the youngest daughter, who was 4, claimed that Charlie the doll spoke to her in the middle of the night. So the parents weren't quite sure what to take of this. They thought that maybe she just had a wild imagination, and obviously one of the 5 children were moving the doll about the bench. It happened again when another one of the children got up to use the bathroom in the middle of the night, and when they woke up, their parents noticed scratches all over their body. The child insisted that Charlie the doll gave her those scratches when she went to the bathroom in the middle of the night. It wasn't the cat, it was the doll. So all of the children ended up being terrified of this doll, and the parents themselves weren't sure what to believe, but they knew they didn't want to keep the doll in their home anymore. So they ended up packing him away, and eventually as the children got older, they decided to get rid of a lot of their old belongings, and he was one of them. They ended up having a garage sale. He was one of the last to go. Charlie the doll now sits in a store called Local Artisans. He's on display with many other oddities. However, this doll has some history behind it for sure, and in my opinion sounds very, very haunted. So haunted doll number 3 is a little doll named Robert, dressed in a sailor suit. Robert is actually the haunted doll that Bunny from haunted doll number 5 named her haunted doll Robertina off of. Robert is a fairly familiar story for me. I've heard this in the past quite a few times, and I believe that they've even made a Hollywood movie surrounding him as a doll. He is a very old doll, over 110 years old. According to his history and his past owners, Robert has caused car accidents, broken bones, job loss, divorce, and an array of other misfortunate events around him as a doll. Robert is kind of an odd-looking doll. He doesn't actually portray quite human characteristics. He has beady little black eyes, a very blank face, and like I'd mentioned, he's dressed in a sailor suit. Robert currently resides in the Fort East Martello Museum in Key West, Florida, where he is on display there. If you are ever in the area and you're able to visit him, that's where he is. He's become famous over the years, and he actually receives letters from pen pals and gifts through the mail because of people having this obscene obsession with him and his history. Before he went to the museum, Robert was actually owned by another gentleman named Robert Eugene Otto. He had received Robert the doll as a gift from his grandfather, and apparently this doll came from Germany. Otto's relationship with Robert the Doll continued into adulthood and was actually described as quite unhealthy. He was an eccentric artist, so he was a unique person and a unique spirit, but he seemed to have a relationship with the doll that wasn't necessarily the same relationship that a person would have with an inanimate object. He treated this doll as if this doll was alive, a part of his family, and a part of himself. Otto ended up having this doll throughout his childhood, and he would actually blame a lot of mishaps or misfortunes that have happened in his life on the doll itself. If something went wrong, if something happened, if someone was hurt, Otto would then blame the doll on whatever happened. He used to take the doll and put it in an upstairs window of his home as an adult, and a lot of the school children going by would say that the doll would move, or he would disappear, or he would pretty much change positions in front of their eyes, and they would be terrified of Otto in his home with his haunted doll. After Otto's death in 1974, the caretaker who took over his home swore that they would hear running and footsteps and even giggling coming from the upstairs where the doll Robert was kept. They even said that the expression on Robert's face would change when anyone badmouthed Otto in his presence, which is terrifying. So after all of those years being with one home, one family, one owner, Otto, he ended up going to this museum, and that's where he now lives his life. So now on to haunted doll number 2. If you're familiar with this doll, which many of you probably are, you will know her as Annabelle, the doll from the famous movie The Conjuring, where she is a porcelain doll with 2 little braids who is very demonically possessed. However, if you're not aware of this, Annabelle is a real doll who was actually a Raggedy Ann doll and was gifted to a nurse student in the 1960s by her mother. The doll itself seemed to have a strange entity and energy around it, where the girl and her roommate decided that it was a spirit of a little girl named Annabelle living or residing within the doll itself. This doll was known to move things around, do mischievous things. Annabelle is actually known to live at the Occult Museum, which is made by the famous paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren. So when the owner of Annabelle decided that there was something wrong with this doll, there was a negative entity residing within the doll, she decided to contact Ed and Lorraine, where then they started doing some paranormal investigating, and they actually determined that Annabelle wasn't a spirit of a past girl, it was actually a demonic energy that had shown itself as a young girl. If you're familiar with demonic entities, you know that many of them come forward as a child, specifically a young girl. That can be a sign that that is not actually a spirit, however, a demonic energy. When Ed and Lorraine decided that it was time to remove her from that home, they put her in a safe space in their museum. However, people that have visited this doll in the museum, she has actually caused terrible misfortune on them, even to the point where a couple who came and mocked her in the museum ended up driving away on their motorcycle and getting in a terrible car accident and dying. She has a very, very famous history, and she's still available to view. However, it is said that you must treat her with respect, and that's probably for the best. So the final haunted doll is a little doll from Germany from the 1800s named Lily. Lily now resides in the Haunted Museum and is up for viewing to the general public. However, it is said that just the image of Lily alone can be enough to haunt someone. I'm hesitant to do that, so if I decide to, I'll make sure to put a warning so you know to turn off your computer or to skip ahead if you don't feel comfortable looking at the image of her. Lily was found by an antique dealer at the bottom of a very old antique trunk. He ended up bringing Lily home with him, and he remembers having reoccurring nightmares about a little girl who suffered a terrible accident. He said he would never speak of these nightmares. He said everything that he witnessed in these nightmares was too terrifying, and he didn't believe that anyone would necessarily believe him, but also he didn't want to subject them to what he had witnessed. After spending some time with Lily in his home, he decided to then bring her into his antique store, where he recalls one time a young girl with her family came in, and he remembers this little girl speaking to Lily, having a conversation with her for multiple hours in his store as if she was a real live person. He said it was terrifying, but he said it was also quite interesting, and the parents just stood back in awe as this was occurring. After the situation happened, the little girl then said to the staff that Lily was actually a little girl and she was subjected to extreme violence in her life. So the owner of Lily now is a gentleman named Zach, who's actually a paranormal investigator, and he owns Lily as well as this museum that has plenty of other haunted and terrifying items, including the demon steps from his documentary, The Demon House. When Zach ended up purchasing Lily the doll, he remembers a woman working at the store had to physically touch Lily and bring her down from the shelf. After doing so, she felt immobilized with fear, and she kept repeating, "I have to wash my hands, I have to wash my hands," and she had incredibly sharp pains in her stomach, all from touching this doll. If you decide you're brave enough to be able to witness and view this doll, she is available to view in Zach's museum in Las Vegas. She by far has earned the #1 spot simply because of her such strong presence, but also the ability to possibly haunt someone just through seeing an image of her. So that's it. That's my list of 5 of the most haunted dolls out there. If you liked this video, if you found it interesting, please be sure to give it a big thumbs up. Also, comment below if you know of any more famous haunted dolls that weren't on this list. I'd love to look into them, and I would love to hear about more scary stories and more scary haunted dolls. If you haven't already, please subscribe, and I will see you all next time. Bye!